morning. Ready for a new project? Well, it's morning here. I don't know where it is, where you are, but good whatever. This is our pattern today. It's a sweater pattern. It's a stretch pattern, and I don't sew very many stretch patterns, so kind of excited about it. There's a trend going on in a vintage sewing community, and there's a sweater that keeps popping up that in the Victorian-ish, Edwardian times, it was called the bicycle sweater. And that's what this pattern is. This is the pattern for the bicycle sweater. What I'm going to be doing is this one. The features of it has the long, tighter cuffs, very full sleeves, and on her, it looks kind of loose, but I don't want mine quite that loose. I think that this pattern probably just has an excessive amount of ease in it, which a lot of patterns do. So I'm going to be cutting out a 14 because when I look at the finished garment measurements, it should be fine. It should be fine because they put a lot of ease. And so we're going into spring and summer, and I just don't feel like sewing a sweater. So instead, I got this knit. It's not really thick. It is 100% cotton, and it is a stretch knit. Oh, got new glasses, and they keep falling down. I need to adjust. So it's kind of lightweight, and it's pretty. It's busy enough that if I spill coffee on myself, I won't see it. So, that's a plus for me. And it's nice and stretchy, which is what the pattern requires. So this is what we're going to do. I'm going to go ahead and cut out. I am going to be using, I was going to say I'm going to be using a 14, but I bought the pattern that starts at 16. So I'll cut out the 16, but I will be taking it in. Just a heads up. So here we go. Okay, so I've got my pieces cut out, and I want to show you something. On this pattern, it looks like even on their model, the sleeve cap is kind of draping off her shoulder a little bit. And I don't want that. What I want is for my sleeve cap to be perky right on top of my shoulder with all of those cute little pleats coming off. That's the look that I'm looking for. So, with that in mind, and because this sleeve is very big, you can see there's a lot of pleats on here, so it's going to be heavy. So what I'm probably going to be doing is taking up this edge of the bodice, and what I'm going to be doing is going ahead and sewing the bodice, putting it on the dress form, figuring out where this should be, and then just adjusting my stitch line from there. I don't think I'm going to be doing a whole lot of altering on the pattern itself. Other than that, I think we'll be okay. I don't really like all of this, but if I'm doing this version with the band on the bottom, it might be okay. It might be okay to have all of that looseness because I'm going to have it tight where the band is. And I just need to make sure that band fits properly. So that's what I've got. We have a lot of pleats here, and there's a little trick that I learned on using tape to mark your pleats that's pretty cool, so I'm going to be doing that too this time. So let me go ahead and get my fabric laid out on here and cut these pieces out, and we'll start putting it together. I am ironing on it's woven stay tape. It's fusible on one side, and it's going to keep those shoulder seams from stretching. I'm going to iron it onto both shoulders, both front and back, and that's going to give it the extra support that we need. All right, so I wanted to show you the method that I am going to be using to sew this stretch knit fabric on my straight stitch machine. This machine has a zigzag and a straight stitch, and that's about it. But you know what? That's all you need. If you have a fancy stitch on your machine, yeah, use it, but I prefer this. So what I'm going to do is I have a ballpoint needle in here. It is a number 11 or 12 or something like that. If I can stretch my fabric as I sew the stitch, it's going to work some ease in there and it'll work just fine. But you don't want to really tug on it. Here's how I do it. I put a hand on top of the fabric, and I'm not holding it down hard. I'm just putting the weight of my hand on it. As it goes, it's going to kind of stretch and feed that extra in. So the feed dogs are basically adding the extra in. So when let me pull this out here. So here's the stitch that the seam I just sewed. It's not 100% flat because the stitches are a little bit loopy. Not really loopy, but just enough that if I stretch it like this, it has that give to it. And that's what I want. So I have a serger that I will be using for the edges. If they're exposed, most of these edges are going to be inside or in a place where you're not going to see. But this is a really good way to use a straight stitch machine for stretch knits. So the first seams that we're going to be making are the shoulder seams. So here I have my tape on there, and I'm going to be pinning the fronts to the back. Okay, so I have it just set here loose on my dress form. And on her, I just know where her shoulder point is the same as my shoulder point. It's 4.5 inches. And you can see on both sides, I've got like an inch hanging off. So what I'm going to be doing is I want the seam to be right here, so 1/2 inch in, so that it's sitting on top of my shoulder so that those lovely pleats can have more fullness up here. So I'm actually going to be trimming an inch off of the outside edge of the shoulder and just kind of blending that in to my sleeve arm side hole. And but other than that, I think that because this fabric is so thin and flowy, I'm not going to worry about the extra fullness and bulk in the blouse part because it is going to be gathered into the band. But this I am going to deal with. So if that's something that concerns you on the pattern, I would suggest altering it, figuring it out at this point. So what I'm going to do is get one of my special little marking pens, make a mark where the 1 inch is, and I'm probably going to guide it in to about this point. I'm going to do that on both sides. And just to make it level, guiding it into about this point. So not being too particular because it is a stretch knit, I'm just going to kind of aim as I go and take it up and do the same on both sides. So I want to show you how I'm going to be marking these pleats. First, what I do is just work with one layer at a time. And I've actually already done one sleeve. I wanted to make sure that it would work well on this fabric before I filmed. But I pin it below the point where all of my pleats are. That way it's easier to flip this up and down and keep it all together. Now I'm going to be using masking tape, and this is honestly way too wide. I can't find my little skinny masking tape. So what I'm going to do is just cut several little about 1/4 inch wide strips. And you need as many as you have lines across here. Okay, so I have a bunch of pieces of tape cut that are about 1 inch long and about 1/4 inch wide. It doesn't have to be precise. The only thing that has to be precise is one edge has to be straight. I'm going to start in the middle. There's a dot in the very middle, and I am just going to put my tape there. And I try to place it about where the stitching line is, so about 1/2 inch in, because if you stitch over it, it's not a big deal because the stitching kind of perforates it, so it's easy to pull off. But if you don't, it makes it even easier. Then with each piece of tape, like on this side, I'm going to put it so that the flat edge of the tape matches up with the line that I'm going to be folding. Okay, So let me go ahead and place all of these. I just lift up my pattern a little bit and place it. And I have a little bit hanging off the edge, and that's for a purpose. So, and this goes really quickly, especially on a stretch knit and something like this that's really hard to pin, because every time you want to stick a pin in it, it wants to bunch up and move or something. That's a pain. That is really a pain. So you can see here, I'm halfway done. I've pinned all of those, and I've pinned them on this side of the marking line. Now over here, I'm going to put the tape so the flat edge is on that side of it. Okay, so if I can lift up the pattern, there we go. So I'm going to put it here. Just because I love pleats. And normally, if there's only one or two, and if it's a woven fabric, you don't need to worry about this. But on something like this, where it's all knit, and there are so many of them that it's easy to lose track of, especially on a busy print, this technique is a lifesaver. So now they're all taped. I'm going to take my pins off. What else I do, because it's so easy for me to lose track of what is the front and what is the back. The back has more notches than the front. I go ahead and stick a pin in the back just so I don't lose track of that later on. So I'm going to set this pattern aside. So I'm going to start in the middle. I know this middle piece is my center, and that on both sides they're coming to meet at the center. Get these so they're not stuck to my table here. Okay. So what I'm going to take this tape, fold it at the edge of the tape, okay, and place it halfway over the center one, and push that tape on top. And the same thing with this one. Take the edge of this tape and place it halfway over the center one. Okay, so those are all taped together. Now, if you have, you can fold it over the back if you want to. If you're tired of it sticking to your table, that's fine. And just to be extra safe, I don't lose them, I throw a clip on top of my tape. Okay? So I'm bending this edge over and placing it on top of that one. Folding it under and clipping it. Just going to keep doing that. I got two more over here. Fold this edge over. Can you see what I'm doing? Bend the tape. Clip it. Put the edge of this tape over the edge of that tape. Fold it over and clip it. So now it's being held a couple ways. One, because the tapes are sticking it together, and also the clips are clipping it over. So now on this side, remember it's the edge that's towards the center that are going to be lined up. So I'm folding those two. Wants to stick to my fingers. And usually, if you have something that's not quite as sticky as a heavy-duty masking tape, you can use that. So, wanted to show you how this is going to work. I'm going to use just under 5/8 inch seam spacing, just so that I can get it close, very close to where my final seam is going to be. And I'm just sewing right over. If you happen to hit some of that masking tape, it doesn't bother the needle at all. It doesn't gum it up, you know. Just keep on going. And this is so much easier than dealing with a whole bunch of straight pins, especially on a fabric as stretchy as this is. Got my seam. And I've got that. Now what I'm just going to do is, since my seam is sewn, I'm just going to go back and pull off the little tapes. Okay, so technically, according to the directions, what they want you to do next is sew the part we just pleated together. And then take your big cuff and fold it in half and sew it up here, and then kind of sew them on the sides and everything, and sew it together. Now, I'm going to do mine a little differently. You can follow their pattern directions if you want, and I'll tell you one reason is I do not have a free arm machine, so sewing a little stretch cuff in a circle this way is a little bit difficult on my machine. So what I'm going to do is basically put the cuff onto the sleeve and then sew the side seams. That way, it's easier. It's just easier, honestly. So taking your cuff, because it's same both ways, the first thing I'm going to match up is where my notch is. So down here. Then it doesn't have you gather because you're using a stretch knit fabric. It just has, I'm going to go ahead and just pin this side over here. Pin this side over here, and then I'm going to move that clip out of the middle and put a pin there too. That way, in case it wants to shift when I'm stretching it, it's less likely to do that with a pin than with a clip. Okay, so now what we're going to do is sew it, but just stretch it. Stretch and sew. Okay, so just like I do when I'm easing something in, I'm putting the side that has extra fabric on the bottom. So that means that my cuff piece is on the top here. So that way, in addition to stretching, the feed dogs can help guide some in. And it looks like this is going to work out just fine. So I'm not just stretching, but I'm easing at the same time, if that makes any sense. So let's see what this looks like on the right side. No, it's a very busy print, but I can see the gathers, and I think that's going to work. Okay, so now I have this very long sleeve, okay? And here's the sleeve part, here's the super long cuff. What I'm going to fold it in half now and stitch it all the way down this side. So I'm going to match up my seams, and I am actually pushing my seam allowances towards the cuff because I want those to be encased inside of the cuff when I sew it and finish it. So okay, so I have that sewn, and I did actually, my serger looks terrible. I think I needed a new needle, but anyway, I ran the serger over the sleeve part, not the cuff part, because that's not going to show anyway. And at this point, what I need to do is fold the cuff in half. And we're going to stitch it to the top. This is one that I made years ago. It's basically just canvas and wool, and I stuffed it with sawdust because we had sawdust. And I'm pulling my cuff over it just so that it's going to give it just enough stretch that it's going to be easy to go ahead and in place. So I'm going to fold my raw edge under about 5/8 because that's what the seam allowance calls for. Try to get it folded so it's folded in the right place here. I'm going to fold it under about 5/8 and pin it up so that the stitching lines are matching here. And flip it to the opposite side. Fold it about 5/8 down and pin it. And I'm going to do that 90 degrees away on the other sides. And that way we can make sure that everything's fine. If you don't have one of these, a water bottle or a spray can or something, and just stick one of those in, maybe with a sock or something around it if you want something you can pin into. It's not a real technical thing. It's just something that's going to give your sleeve enough body that it stretches on its own and you don't have to be tugging at it, is basically the idea. So, all right, so I just wanted to let you know it's possible to do this on a flatbed machine. It's easier with a free arm, but it's possible. But what you do is you put the sleevey part up here. The cuff part is down here, because that way you have a lot more room to work with. And just put it in place. Make sure you're only stitching on what you're supposed to. And just take it nice and slow going around. Again, I'm doing that thing where I am kind of stretching it as I sew, just to match up. Making sure that the fold line is meeting the stitch line, and that way I know that when I'm doing my thing, it's just basically going to look like a top stitch from the outside, that it's going to be nice and level. Here is going to be my cuff. Now it's not very tight. If you're going to want something tighter, and I kind of like it tighter, you're going to need to take it in down here. So I decided I'm not going to alter the pattern, the one that I'm actually sewing today, because I'm using such a thin fabric, it's not going to make that much of a difference. But if I was sewing a really thick sweatery one and I wanted it more tapered, this is how I'm going to do it. Take your big cuff piece and fold it at the fold line, and then fold it in half again. And I want to take an inch off at the cuff, not up here, but just down here at the cuff. So I'm going to mark it here at the 1 inch point and draw a line to the cutting line up above, and go ahead and trim that. And I'm just going to trim it right now because I know that next time that's how I'm going to want it to be done. And so now my pattern is permanently changed, so it tapers more in at the wrist, and then this is up at the forearm, and I just think that gives it a nicer shape. Okay, so next is our collar piece, and I'm going to make my notch. Really, that's the only one I care about right now. This is cut on a fold up here, and we're going to fold this in half. So I have my notch down here, and we're going to put a seam across here. Okay, so now we're going to fold this thing in half, right side out. So this is basically the collar. So I have it all clipped on and matched up the way they call for, but I'm going to take it off. And the reason is because if I do it this way, the way they want, I'm going to have that seam allowance on the inside. And yes, they tell you to go ahead and top stitch down and then trim off. But I would rather do it similar to what I did with the sleeves, where I only sew on the one side, bring the other one up, flip it under. And since they're going to call for me to top stitch anyway, I might as well top stitch, folding that edge in and hiding all that loose seam allowance. I think it'll give a prettier finish to the inside. So I'm going to basically open up this collar piece so it's only a single layer, just a right side of the collar up against the right side of the neckline, and pull this side down and just sew those 2 layers and leave this one free. All right, so I've got it sewn on. So this is what my neckline looks like right now. Very long. So I'm I still haven't sewn my side seams together yet. I'm going to go ahead, pull. I'm going to match up my center back fold here with the folding it in about 5/8 of an inch and pinning it above that spot down below. I might go get my ham. I think I'm going to go get my ham. I will be right back. All right, so I went and got my ham just so I could make this work a little bit easier. It's like a big stuffed animal kind of thing. Working it kind of like I did with that long sleeve thing before, so that I only have one layer at a time, and it's kind of holding it where it should be. So here is the center back. I'm just going to go ahead and make a couple other pins near it here. So again, I'm going to turn my edge under about 5/8 of an inch and place it. And I place it just so I can barely see my stitching line. Again, that way I can tell when I'm top stitching that everything is lined up properly. And just kind of do that. And putting a ham in the middle of it makes it so much easier to work around. Just if you ever want to do an artsy craftsy project, make one. If anyone's interested, let me know, and I'll make a video on making a ham in a sleeve roll. But they're pretty basic. But let me know if you're interested. So now I have it pinned all the way around, and I'm going to go back to my machine, and just like I did with this top of the sleeve, I'm going to be top stitching it just right about 1/8 of an inch in, all the way around. Okay, so I've got it all sewn on and top stitched, and so now the inside I think looks a lot better. And I did that thing where I slightly stretch it as I sew, so it should be fine for pulling over my head. And I think that looks a whole lot cleaner than having a raggedy seam allowance stuck out. Okay, so I'm looking at their instructions for the band, and they want you to do the same thing where you sew it, top stitch over a loose raggedy edge, and then trim it. And yet, one more time, I'm going to do it my method instead of theirs, which is, instead of doing my side seams, before I've done that, I'm going to go ahead and put the band wide open on my front and my back. The band is not that much smaller, so there's not a lot of gathering there, which makes me wonder, how wide is this band? Hmm, 19 inches. Well, see, this could be an issue because that's going to give me a 38 inch. I want this band to be up here near my waist. And my waist is a lot smaller than 38 inches. So I'm actually going to, before I do any of this, take this band up. Because here, I want to show you something. Okay, so I just have this placed on here. The sleeves aren't attached. They're just kind of pinned on my dress form. It's just kind of sitting. But I want you to see where the bottom of the blouse is falling is pretty darn close to the waistline. So if I leave that band, and the band is about the same width as my hips. My hips are down here. If I leave that band as wide as it is right now, this is just going to be out loose. What I want is, since it's going to be falling near my waist, for it to be closer to my waist measurement than my hip measurement. And that way the blouse will actually come in a snugger at my waist and give a nicer fit. So I have both layers of my band right here. And just measuring from where inside the stitch line to both sides. Oh my gosh, every time I measure this, it seems wider. Okay, well, let's just be conservative and say 19 inches across is going to give me a 38-inch finished width. I don't want that. My waist is 30 inches, okay? So half of that obviously is 15, but what I want is I want to have a seam allowance over here, have my 15 over here, and then add like another 3/4. That will give me a little bit of playroom. Okay, so I'm going to draw a line over here where I'm actually going to cut. So I've given myself another extra 1/4 inch, so I should have an inch or so of ease. Okay, so this is how I'm going to do it. I've marked my center of my bodice piece, and I'm folding my little band piece so I can find the center there, and I'm going to match that up. Match up the sides, and you can see now I have a lot of gather type ishness in here, that when I sew it, you know, doing that stretching and easing and stitching all at the same time stuff, it's going to give a nice gather, because the pattern piece, the way it was, there really was not much difference between the band and the bodice. So this way I think that I'm going to have a lot more fullness in there and give the effect that actually I was looking for. And again, you may not want this effect. You may want it more of a flat, loose type of a outfit, which is fine. I'm just saying what I'm looking for, if you ever look up bicycle sweater, I'm looking for more of a bicycle sweater type. Okay, so now I have my top piece sewn onto my band, and while my band is still open, now I'm going to sew the side seams, and I am pushing these seam allowances down into the band. I'm pinning them down there because, as always, I'm going to have my band fold up, tuck in, and hide those. So I'm going to go ahead and pin both sides and stitch that, and I will be right back. So this is what my top looks like right now. And just like every other time, using the same method, I'm going to open up the seam allowance here, fold it under about 5/8, bring it up here where it was sewn on, and pin it in place. Then I'm going to do the same thing to the other side, to the front, to the back, and then it will be ready to top stitch on. Okay, so it's all pinned on all the way around. Gonna go stitch it, be right back. So this is the inside now. I like it a lot better with all that seam allowance hidden, and it's a nice tight little band. So final step is setting in the sleeves, because we're not going to have to hem it or anything like that because it's already done for us. So I'm going to go grab some sleeves and start pinning them in. And because the front and back of this blouse look very similar, I am going to be sewing one of my little labels into the back. I don't do this on everything, but I'm going to do it on this because I think that's just going to make it easier to, at a glance, figure out what is the front and what is the back. I want to show you that as I fold it, I am putting a pin into each pleat just to hold that really securely as I sew, and that way there's not a chance that the little pleat's going to get folded up the wrong way as I stitch around, just making it lay a lot flatter. Well, she is done. I've got her up on the dress form here, and I think that the little waistband is gonna work, and it pulled over the dress form fine, so I don't think that that's going to be a problem because she is solid. So if it had trouble pulling over her as a very solid thing, it would have trouble pulling over me, but it didn't, so we're good. Here is my very tall collar that's just kind of falling, bunching. And my sleeves, my long cuffs, and like I said, next time I think I'm going to take these cuffs in a little bit, and now here's my seam, and it's falling right where I think my actual shoulder seam should be, right on top here. And all of those nice little pleats. Now the only thing that I see is that because this fabric is very thin and very drapey, we don't have a lot of body here. And part of me wants to go hail back to my 1980s days and throw a shoulder pad or a little cap sleeve poofing underneath there to hold it out. But I'm not going to do that. This is going to be a comfy knit top, so I'm going to go try it on. So here's the pattern. Would I do it again? Yeah, I would. I might wait until next winter and use like a thicker sweatery type fabric. But honestly, this knit, it worked really well. Now, there were a few things that I changed on it, and I would recommend if anyone is going to do it, that they look at those things. Namely, the shoulder seam placement, the cuffs. I'm going to taper them in more next time, and you see how even on their model it comes kind of low. A lot of people like that. They like their sweaters coming down this far. That kind of drives me nuts because I feel like I'm always going to get it dirty and stuff. So for me, next time I might make that a little bit higher. I might make it about an inch higher just so that it's like traditional cuff and not hand length. And the other thing was the band. This band right here, because I like where it sits naturally is at your waistline, and I think that if you take it in so the width of those band pieces match pretty closely your actual waist measurement, I think it'll be a lot more flattering than the width that they have included in the pattern, which is more of a hip measurement. Just make sure when you sew it on that you sew it on with enough stretch and give that you can pull it over. But other than that, it's very comfortable. It's kind of fun. This turtleneck type top, it doesn't hug right close to your neck to drive you nuts that way. It's more of a drapey. It's not exactly a cowl neck, but it's somewhere in between turtleneck and cowl neck. It's just kind of soft and lovely. So yeah, love it. Put it together super fast. So it's a good deal. And I think I hear my husband pulling up in the driveway. Gonna go get some dinner. Gonna wear my new top. See you later. Bye-bye.